Thanks for listening to the Duval Rundown, brought to you by Injury Care Centers. Your path to recovery starts here. Now here's your host, Gus Logue.
Good morning. Welcome to episode 42 of Duval Rundown. My name's Gus Logue. Today I'm joined by Mia O'Brien to talk about the Week 15 matchup between the Jaguars and the Jets, but more so just kind of standing back, looking at the broader picture and seeing which of these teams is kind of better set up for the future. And so I think it'll be a pretty fun exercise. But before we get to that, we've got some Jaguars trivia to hit, as always. The last time the Jaguars hosted the Jets was 2019, which was a 29-15 win for Jacksonville. Which song did the PA announcer infamously play during that game? Was it Empire State of Mind? Was it the Party Rock Anthem? Was it the Happy Birthday song? Or was it Ghostbusters? Mia?
Oh, we know what it was. I was in the stadium that day. It was Ghostbusters in honor of Sam Darnold seeing ghosts. And now here we are 5 years later, and we live in a world in which Sam Darnold is an MVP candidate, albeit for the Minnesota Vikings. And the Jets still don't have a quarterback, even if they have one of the greatest of all time on the roster.
Yeah, so let's start there. What do you think the Aaron Rodgers situation is in New York? Obviously, the Jets, I think they're officially eliminated from the playoffs at this point, just like the Jaguars. They are 3-10. And so is this Aaron Rodgers' last season in New York, and they're just going to say, see ya, it's been not fun at all, so adios?
So I believe the answer is yes. Now, here's the caveat to that. Ultimately, Aaron Rodgers would be a $49 million dead cap number for the New York Jets if they were to cut him heading into 2025. He is due $23.5 million on the cap next year if he was to be on the roster. That is still not the highest paid player on the roster, given that Devontae Adams would be due $38.3 million next year. He does have a potential out, though, after this season, and so you have to wonder if the old Green Bay duo is already setting their sights on somewhere else that they can bring their services, or do they say to the Jets, hey, you made your bet, now you got to pay up and pay us? Because Aaron Rodgers has expressed that he's not done. He believes he can still play football. It'll be curious, though, with a new regime at the helm of the New York Jets, if they are okay with the edict of Rodgers must play, or do they say, no, this is a situation that has to be blown up, rebuilt, and you need to say goodbye to old A.A. Ron?
Yeah, I think at the very least they're probably going to say goodbye to the quarterback, especially because new regimes so often like to bring in kind of like their own guys, but including at star positions in the quarterback position. And now, like, no one in Jacksonville should be worried that like a new coach will be replacing Trevor Lawrence and bringing in like his own guy, because Trevor Lawrence is a top 10 quarterback. Like, it's very, very hard to find someone better than him. But in the Jets,
although I got to tell you, Gus, so in preparation for today's episode, I made two pros and cons lists where I have the pros for the Jets, the cons for the Jets, pros for the Jags, cons for the Jags. I did put a lot of things in the middle. Trevor Lawrence, the C and the E are in the middle, because I know that there are those in the fan base and in the NFL viewing population who don't view him as a pro. I can tell you this, everyone I've spoken to around the league, for the candidates who are interested, if this job should come open, the head coaching position, the general manager position, Trevor Lawrence is a massive pro for any of those candidates.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't think it's close. I think that's the biggest difference between these two teams.
There's going to be somebody in the comments, whether they're live with us this morning or if they come back later, though, and they're going to say, I saw it on my timeline last night. People still questioning. And I had somebody say to me yesterday, like, why did they pay him this year? I'm like, what world do you people live in? Like, at what point will you understand that, like, I don't care if he ends up ultimately being Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins isn't just walking around the earth and you could just pick him up off the street. The fact that Kevin O'Connell has done what he's done with Sam Darnold is a minor miracle, to be quite frank. And so the fact that you have at bare minimum a top 15 quarterback in the National Football League, and when he's coached properly, he's top 10, sign me up every single day of the week.
Yeah, it's almost like the Walker Little contract, honestly, because even if you're not sold on Walker Little, the player, like, just at the very least, like, there's not a lot of left tackles available out there. Like, that's why Cam Robinson was able to get traded, because there's a very limited quantity of them. And so regardless, like, it makes sense to have that guy under center. But yeah, now obviously I'm a big Trevor Lawrence guy, big Trevor Lawrence believer that once he's gotten better, like, weapons surrounding him over the course of time of his career. Obviously, now with Brian Thomas Jr., that's far and away the best weapon that he's had. But he really does need better coaching and better play calling to just help him and his teammates get set up in better positions to succeed. And so hopefully that'll happen with the next coach. But yeah, that's a huge difference to me, is like having a top 10, 25-year-old quarterback as opposed to having a 40-year-old quarterback who's on his way out. I am interested to see if the Jets keep Devontae Adams, just because I think there's like no chance they keep Aaron Rodgers. I'd be pretty shocked. But maybe they keep Adams around to help out whoever their next quarterback is, especially if it happens to be a rookie. But Mia, why don't you take us down your list? What do you want to hit next in terms of like a pro or con or difference and similarity between these two franchises?
Well, let's hit the two overarching points that I think are critical. The Jets don't have a bad roster, and I think that's a pro. It's quite simply, and these are the words of Connor Rogers of NBC Sports and PFF, it's not a bad roster. They're just playing below expectations, and they're not coached well. That is a conversation that I think we've had in Jacksonville this year. It's a roster that, if put in the right situation, could be extremely successful. Apparently, up in New York, this is, just been the same thing with different faces for the last 12, 15 years. But ultimately, there's nothing that they've been able to do to rectify that. Whereas with the Jags, it's perhaps more frustrating because you had tangible success with this coaching staff just 2 years ago, and where did it devolve? And so that's where, again, the question becomes, is it personnel? Is it coaching? I digress. The other big overarching thing that I think is really important as we look at 2025 for each of these rosters, Gus, is that neither needs crazy super splash signings. Neither needs to utilize cap space, which, while the notion is that the Jaguars, I know, will have a lot of it, they're actually 17th in expected cap space heading into the 2025 offseason, according to Spot Track. And now that's before other roster moves are made. Certainly if Christian Kirk is either traded or shipped somewhere else, released, heaven forbid, which I don't think will happen. But if he was to be traded, I think that also affects it because he obviously has the largest cap number, in addition to Brandon Scherf entering the final year of his contract, with the Jaguars say goodbye to him. So there is a chance the Jaguars move into the top 10 in cap space going into next year. But again, I think both these rosters have pieces. And so it's not like you have to go out and have a spending spree, much like Trent Baalke did going into the 2022 season. So whoever the GM is in New York, they know they're going to walk into a situation where they have pieces. The con to that is that heralded rookie class of 2022 in New York. Yes, the three first-round picks will have the fifth-year option as an option this upcoming offseason. But otherwise, Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, Jermaine Johnson, their contracts are up after next season. Breece Hall will be a free agent unless an extension is reached after the 2025 season. Will McDonald, who's been extremely promising out of Iowa State, their first-round pick from 2023 this season, he would be up, granted with a fifth-year option in 2026. And you couple that with the Williams brothers, who have become the cornerstones in the most improbable of storylines, if I had told you that, circa 2020 or 2020 or 2019. Quincy's contract is up after next year. Quinn Williams has an out after 2026. And so, while yes, whoever the new GM, the new head coaches, they would be walking in and they would have pieces just like you would have here in Jacksonville. I think the contract situation is much more tenuous in New York, which is part of why, look, for all that has gone wrong under Trent Baalke, you give him credit that whoever's walking in the door next knows that they have Trevor Lawrence, Josh Hines Allen, Tyson Campbell, Walker Little for X amount of years locked up here in Jacksonville and in their future plans.
Yeah, and I think the big thing is especially pieces on the offensive side of the ball. Like, it's huge that Jacksonville has a quarterback one, a wide receiver one, a left tackle, and a right tackle going forward for the next, at least 3 years probably, is just huge because, the reason that I say the Jags situation is better because of Trevor Lawrence is just that offense year to year is kind of stickier, and you can rely on it being successful or efficient or productive more often year over year. These defenses rely so much on really turnovers for a lot of production and for their efficiency stats. They can be a little bit not fluky, but just defenses can be a bit volatile going year to year. And so I'm a little bit nervous about the Jets because they certainly do have some pillars on offense like Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson and a couple of good offensive linemen. But I feel like most of their roster talent, and especially their young roster talent, is built on the defensive side of the ball. And that just kind of reminds me of 2017 Jacksonville, where they had the great year and everything was clicking and they were being maximized in terms of coaching and talent. Honestly, maybe not even maximized. There probably was still a little bit of meat left on the bone with Gus Bradley, but like it was definitely an amazing defense, but it just fell apart and unraveled so quickly because like they just didn't get as many turnovers the following year, and the offense wasn't able to really do much. And then by 2020 or 2019, like it was just the roster barely looks similar to what it was in 2017. So I'm a little bit nervous for the Jets that that's going to happen just with how many defensive pieces they have, because their defensive pieces are awesome and they rock, but like in just 2 years, it could look completely different.
I think part of it too, Gus, is that even if those pieces weren't to have a regression to the mean, ultimately you're not going to be able to keep all of these players. It's just the reality of the salary cap. Only the Los Angeles Dodgers can come up with a system to pay Shohei Ohtani $1 or $1 million, whatever it is. It's the equivalent of $1 to him, and figure out a way to keep all of their premier talent. I just don't see a world in which the Jets are going to be able to keep that four-headed monster of that 2022 draft class, let alone all those other pieces we alluded to on this team. I'm glad you brought up offensive line. I do want to hit some pros that I do think there are to the Jets' vacancies at head coach and general manager, because of course the Jaguars do not have those vacancies right now. They have a head coach, they have general manager. We are purely talking if those positions were to open, would it be the Jags or the Jets job that would be most viable and perhaps most appeasing and appealing to a potential candidate? So those young defensive pieces, certainly a pro for the Jets job. The offensive line, I think what's interesting is you've gotten something out of Morgan Moses. He'll probably be back next year. But Olu Fashanu has taken a step forward in his rookie season, and I think that's obviously a huge development considering Elijah Vera Tucker, when healthy, is a very promising offensive lineman, but he has been so banged up. And so if Fashanu can stay on the field, that's a big pickup for the Jets. Joe Tippmann at the center position, I know he's taken his lumps. I can also tell you this. He was the apple of a lot of teams' eyes in the 2023 NFL draft. Because he was there last year. Yeah, so 23 NFL draft. That includes the Jacksonville Jaguars, who did have interest in Joe Tippmann. And so that's 3 homegrown pieces along your offensive line that the hope is you would continue to develop, you would extend, and you would keep them in the building. Now, again, the numbers and cents game, story for another time. But ultimately, to have 3 drafted players along your offensive line who you have developed, that's a big development, because here in Jacksonville, that has certainly been a knock of late. One final pro, not that there aren't other pros, but one final pro that I think is really important is that we know the general manager position, the head coaching position, vacant in New York right now. And so if you are a head coaching candidate who has interest and you have teamed up with a potential general manager, Woody Johnson, who potentially also could be shipped across the pond to be the ambassador to the UK once again, depending on what the Trump administration decides, he's going to let you do whatever you want as long as you win. And especially if he's in London and he's not meddling the way that he has been for the better part of the last 18 months. And so you're going to be given a clean slate. He's willing to spend money just like Shad Khan is in Jacksonville. And you are assured that you can create this vision for the future, especially, again, if he is not in the building. And while I believe that will be the case personally here in Jacksonville, we obviously don't know that to be a fact yet, which is where, God forbid, if Shad Khan makes a half measure and says the general manager is staying, the head coach is staying, but I'm hiring the other one, then that ties you to a previous regime. I want to read you this quote that I got actually from the leadership course that I'm taking on the side from everything else that I do here at 1010XL, Gus. The problem is not how to get new ideas into your head. It's how to get the old ones out. That, I feel like, is at the crux of both of these, not only organizations, but everyone involved with them. Even from the media standpoint, when you speak with some Jets reporters, when you speak with some of our colleagues on the Jaguars beat, there right now is this almost PTSD trigger of, well, I know they're going to do the wrong thing. I've heard it from multiple people, and I don't know why. And I do know why. I know why, because the problem is neither of these organizations has done what the Detroit Lions did in 2020, which is a clear assessment and audit of their football and non-football operations, cleared house, not just cleared house from the head coaching and general manager position, but literally gone in, re-interviewed everyone from the marketing people to the ticket sales, to the nutrition specialists, to the physical therapist, re-interviewed everybody and then said, you know what, we love you, our lifers that have been here forever, but unless you're buying into this new vision, it's time to go. And we'll come up with a nice severance package. We have the money. And again, many of those lifers here in Jacksonville are friends of mine, and I don't want to call for their jobs, but I also know some of them who have even said to me in confidence that, quite frankly, like this organization here, and I think I speak for the Jets too, they're both in need of not only a seance, but that complete cleanse so that this idea of, well, we're not going to get it right completely is eradicated.
Yeah, it's nice for New York that they're already set up that way. I do wonder, like, which is worse, just having an owner that's too involved or having an owner that's not involved enough? Because, like, with Shad Khan, the case might be that he just keeps Trent Baalke on board, even if he does fire Doug Peterson. And then it's like the same thing that happened when Baalke was hired, because he was from that original Dave Caldwell staff. So when Dave Caldwell and whatever the coach was at the time, I think Doug Marone, came out like later on, but like it wasn't actually cleaning house. And I think that's what fans are nervous about happening again, and why people even in our radio station have some PTSD that like the house will not be cleaned. And yeah, I think it's a fair fear, honestly, and we'll see. We've only got about a month left to go, but yeah, on the flip side, Woody Johnson for the Jets has been like, I'm just trying to tell the owners or tell his general manager what to do and be like overly involved in football decision making, which is just very silly. And so it's silly on either end. But for the Jets, again, at least they do have a clean house right now, with Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh have already been fired. I think it's interesting. You were talking earlier about how like the Jets defensive roster especially just isn't, because Connor was talking about this, isn't well coached or like getting the maximum product out of them. And I think it's because of Robert Saleh. I think someone posted this chart showing like their EPA per play allowed throughout the whole season. And as soon as Robert Saleh was fired, it was like a massive drop off. And so like that makes me want Saleh here in Jacksonville.
Well, it's funny you should say that, Gus, because many believe Robert Saleh is Shad Khan's the one who got away. He was a young, promising linebackers coach under Gus Bradley. There was optimism that he was a favorite of Shad Khan's, potentially could be retained. And then he took the defense coordinator position with the San Francisco 49ers. I also know, on good record, that several of the premier head coaching candidates in this upcoming cycle have already earmarked Robert Saleh as if they can pick their DC and they've had communication, it will be Robert Saleh. And it begs the question of if you're Ben Johnson, if you're Liam Cohen, if whoever Todd Monken, if you get the job in Jacksonville and you say to Shad Khan, I will deliver Robert Saleh, let's bring up that stat that Gus just said, because that's all you need to know. That's also the irony, though, is that, well, Jeff Ulbrich will probably get a job somewhere else. I wouldn't think he would follow Saleh potentially to Jacksonville. A lot of those coaches in New York could be here in Duval next year. That irony is not lost on me. One point that I do really want to stress, because I know we only have a little bit of time here on the Duval Rundown this fine Thursday. The number one general manager candidate in this upcoming cycle, and I've heard this from multiple people, so I don't feel out of line saying it, is Ian Cunningham, right now the assistant general manager with the Chicago Bears. Ian Cunningham comes from the Baltimore Ravens, raised by Ozzie, and the Philadelphia Eagles. One of his best friends is Joe Douglas. I don't envision a world in which Ian Cunningham would say, yeah, let me go where one of my really good friends just got fired because the owner is crazy. Yeah. And so if that takes the Jets out of the running from the quote-unquote premier GM candidate, I'm fascinated to see what that does for other great GM candidates that are entering this cycle. Ultimately, it's one of 32, so I don't think it's going to push people away. But if there are other openings like the Jaguars, who we just alluded to, maybe a more viable option, I'm curious when you weigh those two against each other. If you're Ian Cunningham and you've got offers from both, you tell me which one he's going to pick.
Yeah, I would like the Jags job, mostly just because of number 16, but also, yeah, there's pros and cons, as you've listed out, for both jobs, most certainly. But I'll always just keep coming back to Trevor Lawrence, and if the Jets had any resemblance of a young quarterback, then maybe I would call it more of a push, but I don't know. I guess people also have personal preferences in terms of big city vibes versus small beach town vibes.
That's another one.
How much do you think people care about the no state income tax? Because
A lot.
I hear it. Okay, I hear it all the time, and it almost feels like it's turned into like a fan take to me.
No,
But
I think it's real. It's absolutely real. I
okay,
mean, I think especially comparatively to like California,
right.
Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy has a roommate like before he got married. Like he literally, and granted, part of that was he was a seventh round pick, but even after he was entrenched as the starter, like he still was living with a roommate. Like that's I'm just saying, like, I mean, we should not have NFL players that financially to live in San Francisco need to have a roommate. Like that's, I mean, they're making millions, and he still needs to have somebody to have a joint income, which is crazy.
To relate it to this game real quick, you mentioned Alu Fashanu earlier, 11th overall pick in this year's draft. He played really well last week against Miami, and he's played well in general, especially subbing in for Tyron Smith, who's supposed to be the left tackle for this season for the Jets.
Oh, he got hurt? I'm shocked.
Yeah, right? Well, I think that was a Woody Johnson move. He was like, oh, there's a future Hall of Fame left tackle available. We have to get him. But yeah, so good on Joe Douglas for getting like kind of like the backup left tackle who's actually going to be the real left tackle of the future. But Fashanu has played really well recently, so I'm really interested in the matchup between he and Josh Hines-Allen because Josh Hines-Allen does line up on that left side of the offense way more often than not. And so I think it's going to need to be a big Hines-Allen day against a guy who's been good, but he's still a rookie and was pretty inexperienced and raw coming into the league. So I'm hoping it'll be a big Hines-Allen game. And for a score prediction, I'm going to say 17-13 Jets.
Ooh, 17-13 Jets.
I
like that. Well, you know, I've been all about the scoregami. I've heard from multiple people around the Jets that they expect this to be a one-possession game because the Jets are 0-7 in one-possession games this year. They love to go into the fourth quarter with a touchdown lead, and then it somehow evaporates. The Jaguars are 2-7 in one-score games this season. So give me, let's do 18-14. 18-14 Jets. How does that sound?
Okay.
Not a touchdown lead. Maybe they're up 18-7 going into the fourth. Mac Jones leads a drive downfield, and all of a sudden the Jets are panicked, but they do hold on to win. One thing I do want to hit, Gus, before we go, just to match up the numbers. So the Jags are expected to be 17th in cap space expectancy going into 2025. The Jets are 20th. The Jets have 8 total draft picks. The Jags have 10, which includes 2 thirds and 2 fourths. So advantage Jags there, if only in numbers and cents. I do think the holes, if you look at this roster, are also interesting. Some other names as we empty the notebook. I do want to note for the Jets, DJ Reed will be a free agent after this year. And so much like the Jaguars, both these teams will have to address their DB number 2 opposite their star Tyson Campbell, Sauce Gardner. The Jets are also in need of interior defensive line help, as are the Jags. And, of course, their wide receiver situation with Davante Adams, which we led off with, is fascinating. They also could cut Allen Lazard and save money, say goodbye to all the Green Bay Packers, truly clear house, the way that the Jaguars fans are clamoring for here. And then also safety help in both could be a question, certainly is one here in Jacksonville. Chuck Clark set to be a free agent, though, with the Jets, and so that could be another hole they have to address with that limited draft capital and a decent amount of cap space.
Yeah, wide receiver depth is definitely one that stood out to me because it was like they've got Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson, and we've got Brian Thomas and Christian Kirk at the beginning of the year. But like really the rooms behind
we got Josh Reynolds. Come on now. What are you talking about?
I loved the Josh Reynolds signing. I mean, we'll see if anything actually comes of it, but like he was the guy I was hoping the Jags would sign in free agency rather than giving Gabe Davis however much money they gave Gabe Davis.
Gabe Davis is here. I didn't know this. Yeah. I was in the locker room. I didn't know he actually played.
As much as you need like at least one superstar or like kind of like a game breaker or game changer, whatever you want to call it, on your offense to help out your quarterback, especially, you definitely need depth. I mean, because you could say that for any position, but depth is important, including at wide receiver. And so I think that'll be important. But just as similar like with the safety room and interior defensive line rooms, as you mentioned. So, Mia, you got anything else? Should we get out of here?
No, let's get on out of here. But if you guys want to leave a comment, even if you couldn't join us live, we'd most appreciate it here on the 1010XL Jaguars YouTube channel. And, of course, catch us each and every Tuesday, Thursday, and immediately after the game on Sunday.
Yeah, we will see you guys on Sunday. We'll be back, the two of us, joined by Hacker and Tommy Mack, to break down what we saw from the Scorigami game in Jacksonville. So, until then, appreciate everyone for tuning in. We will see you guys next time.